Hello everyone. So today I am going to discuss about the definition of culture and its influence to our lives. So my name is Stephanie Don Ludok. I am a MAPE student. Now I would like to start the discussion with the history and nature of the word culture. According to New World Encyclopedia, culture from the Latin root, which is coller, it means to cultivate. Now, when we say to cultivate, it means to improve or develop something by careful attention, training, and study. It also says that culture is manifested through arts, social structures, and institutions in the society. Examples of arts are literature, visual arts, or graphic arts. Examples of social structures are family, religion, education, law, economy, government. Now, anthropologists has their own concept of culture as well. Anthropologists are those persons who study the aspects of humans within past and present society. According to anthropologists, culture refers to the universal human capacity through or human capacity to classify, codify, and communicate experiences symbolically. So, it generally means that culture is the way of life for an entire society, and this includes the manners in that society, how they dress, the language or dialect that they speak, the religion, rituals, and norms. Now, what is norm? Norm is defined as rules or expectations that are socially enforced in that particular society. Now, culture varies from place to place and country to country. Why? It's because its development is based on historical process operating in local, regional, and national. For example, in the Philippines, local, we have different practices and traditions locally. There are also different practices and traditions regionally, and there are also different practices and traditions nationally. Now, for example, we differ in our ways of greeting others, our clothing, food habits, social and religious customs and practices. For example, we differ in the ways how we greet someone. So, in the Philippines, our greeting is different from the greetings in other countries. In the Philippines, we would say, Hi, kumusta ka? Anong ginagawa mo ngayon or anong pinagkakabalahan mo ngayon in Tagalog. In Bisaya, hi, kumusta makabay? Unsay imong gikabisihan ron, unsay imong gibuhat. So that is the way of how Filipinos greet others. In other country, let's say Korea, they would say annyeonghaseyo or something and they bow. So the different ways sa Philippines and the Korea greetings is way different. Ang Philippines dili mo bow, ang Korea mo bow. So that is one example. Another example is our food habits. We differ in our food habits. In the Philippines, we use spoon and fork or kutsara tinidor, and we also use our hands to eat. In other countries or some countries, they use chopsticks to eat. And some also use fork and a knife to eat. So that is an example of food habits. Now, next example is religious customs and practices. We differ in religious customs and practices. Now, there are differences in the practices of the Christians, the Muslims, the Buddhists, and the Hindus. So that is an example of religious customs and practices. In other words, people are characterized by their distinctive cultural traditions. It's because we have different way of greeting others or the way we speak. We differ in our languages and dialect. We differ from our clothings. We differ in our food habits, and we differ in our religious customs and practices. Next, I would also like to discuss about the general characteristics of culture. Now, we have 8 characteristics of culture. We have the first one, which is culture is learned and acquired. Culture is acquired in the sense that there are certain behaviors which are acquired through heredity. So atoa silang namana gikan sa atoang parents. But our social cultural patterns are not inherited or wala sila nato nakuha gikan sa atong parents. Rather, these are influences from external environment or external influences. It is thus apparent that the culture of a human being is influenced by the physical and the social environment through which they operate or asa sila nag-base or nagpuyo in a certain society or community. Next is culture is shared by a group of people. A thought or action may be called culture if it is shared and believed or practiced by a group of people. So it cannot be called culture if ikaw raw sa individual. Dili siya matawag culture if ikaw raw sa. It should be a group of people sharing or practicing something or a belief or a norm or something. Now we have the third characteristic, which is culture is cumulative. When we will define the word cumulative, it is increased in quantity or adding. So different knowledge embedded in culture can be passed from one generation to another generation. More and more knowledge is added in the particular culture as the time passes by. So let's say this year we have a new culture learned and acquired. Next year there will be another culture that will be learned and acquired, and the next year there will be also another culture that will be learned and acquired. So that is the concept of cumulative, nagkadugang and nagka-increase. Okay, now the fourth characteristic is culture changes. There is knowledge, thoughts, or traditions that are lost as new cultural traits are added. So this is the concept of change. Naay mawala, lost, and naay madugang, ma-add. There are possibilities of culture changes within the particular culture as time passes by. So, naay mawala, naapoy madugang. That's why it is changing. The fifth one is culture is dynamic. No culture remains on the permanent state. Culture is changing constantly as new ideas and new techniques are added. So it is the same with the fourth characteristic, that culture is changing, dynamic. There is no permanent state of a culture. Na ay madugang, na ay mawala, na napoy madugang, na ay mawala. So that is the concept of dynamic. This is the characteristic of culture that stems from culture's cumulative quality. So, na sila same nga concept. Na ay madugang, and naapoy mawala, na napoy madugang. So, that is dynamic. The sixth characteristic is culture gives us a range of permissible behavior patterns. It involves how an activity should be conducted and how an individual should act appropriately. So, there is a limitation or a range sa individual na unsay iyahang dapat buhaton in this particular community. So, there is a range or a limitation of how should an activity should be conducted and how an individual should act appropriately. That is the sixth characteristic. Now, seventh characteristic is culture is diverse. It is a system that has several mutually interdependent parts. Although these parts are separate, they are interdependent with one another, forming culture as whole. So, diverse. There are different aspects. There are different parts. There are different institutions. There are different social structures. But even though there are different, there are differences. They are working differently, but they are interdependent, meaning naadya sila connections. They are helping one another. The social structures or institutions are helping one another to form a culture as a whole. So that's it. Culture is diverse. It is same in the classroom nga naay lain-lain nga students. There are students that are from different places, so they have different way nga mo act, way nga mo speak. There are also students nga introvert. There are also students that are extrovert. But even though they are diverse or different, but still they are forming something that is a whole. So that is culture is diverse. Now last, culture is ideational. Often, it lays down an ideal pattern of behavior that are expected to be followed by individuals so as to gain social acceptance from the people with the same culture. So, there are, if we say ideational, there are ideal patterns of behavior that should be followed sa mga tao to be accepted in the community. So, there are ideas and ideals to be followed sa mga tao to form a culture in that certain society or community. So those are the characteristics of culture. First, culture is learned and acquired. Second, culture is shared by a group of people. Third, culture is cumulative. Fourth, culture changes. Fifth, culture is dynamic. Sixth, culture gives us range of permissible behavior patterns. Seventh, culture is diverse. And lastly, culture is ideational. Okay, so those are the characteristics of culture. Next, there is a question, how does culture influences our lives? It influences our lives in three principles. First is truth. Second is beauty, and third one is goodness or ethical. Now, what does these three principles mean? First, it is culture that brings us closer to truth or kamatuoran through philosophy and religion. So that is truth. Second, it brings beauty in our lives through arts. What are the examples of arts? Literature, visual arts, graphic arts. And makes us aesthetic beings. Lastly, it is culture that makes us ethical being by bringing us closer to other human beings and teaching us the values of love, tolerance, and peace. So, natay goodness or ethics. So, what is that? Truth, beauty, and goodness or ethical. Overall, if we add these three up, culture provides us with ideas, ideals, and values to lead us to a decent life. So, through culture, it helps us to be human beings. So that is how culture influences our lives. I think that would be all in my video report about the definition of culture, the how culture influences our lives. So I will just post here at the end of this video my sources about culture and its characteristics and the whole report. Thank you for listening, watching, and paying attention in my video report. Thank you. Take care, everybody, and God bless us all. Bye bye.